This episode is brought to you by the Command Presence Leadership Institute. Find out more by visiting commandpresence.net.
Welcome to the Faces of Leadership with Michael Warren. Be the leader you wish that you had.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Faces of Leadership podcast, where we believe that leadership is about two things. It is about people, and it is about actions. We talk with leaders from across society who are stepping up to do what they can, where they are with what they have. The question remains, though, what can we learn from them? What can we learn from each other as we strive to be the leader that we wish we had? Hello, everybody. My name is Michael Warren, and I am blessed to be your host. Thank you so much for being here today. And folks, what an incredible conversation it was in the last episode with Chief John Robinson. For me, it's always more meaningful when the people that we speak with is someone who is both competent and passionate, and Chief was both of those. So Chief, thank you so much for the conversation. It's always a great pleasure for me to be able to speak with you. But on to today's guests. So our guest today is the co-owner and chief executive officer at MACNLOW Associates, a public safety training and consulting firm based in Grand Ledge, Michigan. She and her brother, Andrew Bouck, purchased the company way back, and I hate saying way back when I'm referring to 2013, but way back in 2013. And MACNLOW itself has actually been in business for over 45 years. The company offers a broad spectrum of training courses on topics in the law enforcement, 911 dispatch, fire, homeland security, emergency management, courts, and corrections. MACNLOW primarily serves public safety agencies in Michigan, but frequently provides programs throughout the United States. In addition, MACNLOW offers personnel and operational efficiency assessment for public safety agencies. By the way, quick throw in here, it's always a good idea for leaders to get an outside perspective because we become blind to what's going on internally. Provides training based on these assessments and creates developmental strategies and programs for all levels of personnel. Our guest is currently a member of the Association of Public Safety Communications Officials, National Emergency Number Association, Michigan Sheriff's Association, and the Michigan Association of Chiefs of Police. Prior to MACNLOW, our guest was the executive director of the Ingham County Bar Association for over 13 years. Folks, our guest today had to work with lawyers. Enough said. Okay. Our guest was responsible for all aspects of the organization, including development of continuing education programs for Lansing area lawyers and judges, publication of a monthly legal newspaper, operation of a local lawyer referral service, and all community outreach programs. Again, she's still working with lawyers. While at the Bar Association, she served 2 terms as the president of the Michigan Association of Bar Executives. Earlier in her career, our guest was an administrative manager and human resources supervisor at 2 prestigious law firms. Our guest earned her Bachelor of Science degree in Business Administration from Central Michigan University. She is actively involved in her community, and her volunteer work includes 8 years on the boards of the Grand Ledge Educational Foundation and numerous other organizations. She particularly enjoys tutoring and mentoring high school students, promoting literacy in teens and adults, and coaching an elementary school team for Girls on the Run. She has been married to her husband, Scott, for 33 years, and they have 3 daughters. Please welcome to the episode, Kristen Bouck Kemp. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Michael. It's my pleasure to be here today.
You know, let's start with 33 years. Okay, 33 years. There's a lot of our listeners that haven't even been alive for 33 years. That's a long time to be with somebody.
Indeed it is. Somehow we've managed to survive each other. And I think we'll touch on this a lot today. It comes from a lot of communication, a lot of mutual respect, and a lot of compromise.
Well, and I guess I should tell our listeners that we're actually doing a first for the podcast. We're recording on site, if you will. We're not in the studio. We're actually on site of a training event that's a co-produced training event that's spearheaded by MACNLOW, but also involves Command Presence, who is our sponsor for the podcast. But your husband is such a supporter. He's actually helping out, isn't he?
He is. Maybe much to his chagrin today, he is going to make a little 35-minute road trip to pick up our boxed lunches.
But that's the kind of support. And that in itself is a form of leadership, isn't it? Because one of the things that you and I talked about over the past few days that we've been together, and I can't remember your exact terminology, but I'm going to try to put it out there. You go, listen, I'm not out front. I'm the background person. How does somebody in the background, how do they provide leadership? Because quite honestly, if your husband wasn't making that trip, we'd have a bunch of unhappy people in that room next to us.
I'm not even sure what the question was in that, but I think the best way that I can describe everything is always lead by example. I learned early on, probably from my parents, that you don't ask anybody to do anything that you wouldn't be willing to do yourself. So in this case, my husband's going to go pick up lunch. If he couldn't do it, I would either do it or I'd find somebody on my staff here that was available to do it. And who makes the best sense to do that? Well, today it's the guy that's not getting paid to be here.
It's funny because I love music. By the way, I've met some music lovers here that I think are my new best friends. They don't know it yet, but they're my new best friends. A band, no matter how good they are, if they didn't have good leadership, if they didn't have good management of their time and of their resources, they wouldn't stay successful for long. And you've got some rock stars on your training staff. But truth of the matter is, they're only rock stars if they get in front of people. And that's your job, isn't it? Getting them in front of people, the proper audience at the proper time, and making sure things are running smoothly so that they, vicariously through you, can make an impact.
I would agree. Everybody has a role to play, and we're only all successful if all the pieces and parts come together in the right place at the right time and, of course, at the right price and so forth. We can't all do it as individuals, but when we all come together as a team and everybody excels in their specific area of expertise, then lo and behold, we end up with a great product and have a lot of fun doing it as well.
Well, and I love how you put that in their area of expertise, because if a leader puts people in the wrong area, no matter how much of a rock star they may be in a different discipline, they're almost set up for failure, aren't they? So would you agree that as the CEO of your organization, one of your biggest responsibilities is putting the right people in the right place?
Absolutely. I know a lot of great public safety professionals who are very good at their job as a street cop or behind the console as a 911 dispatcher and so forth. That doesn't necessarily translate to a classroom training environment. So I have to identify who can take their skills that they learned on the job and make that an interesting experience in the classroom for other people to learn from. Those are just a few examples of what I have to do. But yes, you have to be able to identify what people excel at and get them in the right position at the right time. Sometimes that's easier said than done, but but that is a big part of my job, is to make sure that everybody is doing something that they excel at, but also that they enjoy, because to me, those are the two biggest pieces. Is you have to like what you do and you have to do it well.
Well, speaking of doing things well, one of the things that has been incredibly impactful for me this week, okay, in beautiful Petoskey, Michigan, throwing out, hey, by the way, people from the Courtyard by Marriott have been fantastic hosts here for us. They provided an incredible space. The property's beautiful, so shout out to them. One of the things that's been really impactful for me this week is we did an episode with a guy named Jameson Peavyhouse, who is vice president for Rapid SOS, retired emergency 911 center director. And kind of what we talked about in the episode is how people who are the true first responders in public safety agencies often are some of the most undertrained and almost hidden away parts of the group. But man, not only do you have some of those people here, a lot of those people here in the training, we had a presenter yesterday. Actually, we had two presenters yesterday that work in that field, and they were rock stars. Folks, just to be very clear, one was in the morning and one was the opening act, one was the closing act. Two completely different stories, two completely different topics, but equally impactful. And so let's start with the opening act, if we could. He actually used a story about an expedition back in the early 1900s. First of all, how do you find people like that? And then How do you go about in your organization developing courses for those types of people, for those groups of people who are underserved in agencies? How do you go about developing training for them so that they can be more impactful in their agencies?
The training aspect, particularly in the state of Michigan, is actually very good in terms of 911 dispatchers and their training requirements through the state. So here in Michigan, we have the advantage of they have to meet certain requirements, and that's not necessarily the case throughout the country. But in terms of selecting instructors or finding instructors, sometimes it happens just by students who are in our classroom who clearly are exhibiting communication skills and leadership skills, speaking skills, and so forth, and they're contributing to classroom conversations in a very meaningful way. Rich Thacker, who was our first speaker yesterday, Rich is a phenomenal person, phenomenal speaker, very entertaining, and I actually stumbled upon him. He took the time to introduce himself at an APCO-NINA conference many years ago and said, hey, I'd be interested, and we met after that. And it's developed into a whole lot of topics and training materials. And his wife, Chara, is also fantastic. She now works for MACNLOW. One of those happenstance meetings that has evolved into something really, really great. But to specifically address, other topics and other ways we come across things, it's a matter of staying on top of what's happening in the profession. And it gets a little challenging in my position because I'm not talking about just law enforcement or just dispatchers. What a corrections officer needs is very different from what a road patrol officer needs. What a 911 telecommunicator needs is largely very different from what a hospital operator might need. So you have to address specific things for each profession. But a lot of our main topics, communication and leadership in particular, literally could apply to every profession on the planet. And in some ways, that makes my job very easy.
And you're absolutely correct, because Rich is a rock star. His presentation was on the job, as I like to say. But as good as he is, his wife is even more of a rock star. And by the way, those are my new best friends I was speaking about. We were exchanging music groups that we liked and songs that we liked. Would you agree with me? Because when I watched his presentation yesterday morning, the dude's excited about his profession. And his excitement and love of the profession came through in the presentation. And this is one of those audiences, folks, that is very diverse in terms of not only positions within the agencies, but ranks within the agencies. But everybody was eaten out of his hand, and it was because of that passion and that love. And I think that's what a leader does, is they're the ones that set the tone for passion and love within the agency.
I agree. And I really love to see a classroom full of, I'm going to say students, but adult learners come together and be excited about a topic and then take that back to their individual agencies and watch that enthusiasm and growth spread. And I think that's what training and development is all about, is taking a concept, leading, growing, passing on that enthusiasm. And I think I'm really fortunate MACNLOW has a great staff of instructors. And that's what they do day in and day out when they're teaching, is inspire people to learn and grow.
Rich did such a good job. And I don't want people to take this the wrong way, but he had people fired up. I mean, they were fired up about the profession in a very practical way. A lot of times people get fired up when they go to a quote unquote training session, but there's very little real world applicability in what they talked about. People were fired up. They were ready to go start using what he did. And they weren't disappointed that there was another day to go. But if they could have gone to work today and applied some of it, I think they would have been happy with that too.
Absolutely. And I like to think that learning is fun all day, every day. One thing that I think inspires me as a leader is I read a lot. I try to take something from that and apply it, not just on the job, but in my day-to-day personal life as well. And Rich just does that on a phenomenal level on a day-to-day basis. And I don't mean to point out just Rich, because I have a whole cadre of instructors. He just gets the shout out today. So to any of my instructors listening, this applies to all of you.
Well, so let's go to another rock star that you brought in here yesterday. Yesterday afternoon, folks, we were able to listen to one of the most difficult presentations, not in terms of the speaker but in terms of the fact that it was a real event and it was a tragic event. And I'm referring to the active shooter event that occurred on the campus of Michigan State University on February 13th, 2023. And I thought it was one of the most well done briefings that I've received on it, because we had two people here and they each brought different perspectives. And I think that that's one of those things that leaders often lose sight of, is that we get so caught up in our perspective that we forget all the people that we're supposed to be leading have a different perspective because their job's different. So you brought in somebody from the law enforcement side and also someone from the 911 side. And folks, so I typically use law enforcement as an all-inclusive term that includes dispatch and patrol and corrections and probation and parole. It's all one big family. But to hear their story, and so let's talk about Barb first, if we could. She had me crying because she's up there and she said it several times, the impact that this event had on her people. And as sad as she was about the impact it had on the students, you could tell that the impact that it had on her because of how it hurt her people. And she said that several times, and she tried to talk about how she could care for her people. To me, she exemplified what leadership should be about. And it's about taking care of our people. I don't know if you got the same vibe, but that's what I took away.
Absolutely. Barb and Chris did a fantastic job yesterday, and it's that ripple effect that Barb described so well. You know, it started on February 13th, but the ripple effect of that event will last forever. The waves continue for everybody involved, whether it be students to community, whoever it may be. It's easy to get choked up about that. Yes, part of being a great leader is to take care of your team. And I think Barb and Chris have both done that very well. And I think that's a lesson for all of us, is to sometimes you got to get out of your head and remember that there's a lot of other people counting on you. We have to help each other heal, get better, improve, whatever the circumstance may be. But that does start from the top in a lot of cases. And Barb has handled that exceptionally well.
I think you and I are alike in a lot of ways, because I try to be an intentional learner. And one of the things that I learned from her yesterday that I quite honestly never, ever considered, and I've been in this business a long time, this is not to diminish the impact that this event had on the folks that were answering the phone calls and were speaking on the radio or responding in patrol cars. That's not to diminish this. But she talked about the re-traumatizing aspect of her position, because she was there. She was working the phones. I mean, she was there within 20 minutes of this event going down because her people needed her. And what they needed from her at that time was they needed help because of the volume of work that was coming in. But she talked about the impact that it had and continues to have on her, because she's in charge of FOIA. And so when requests come in for the radio or the phone traffic, she actually has to go and listen to that stuff again numerous times in order to redact the information that's required by law to be redacted. Watching her talk about that, leadership really is a heavy burden. And she talked about, this is one of those things you can't delegate. I can't put my people through it. How does a leader, I guess in that realm right there, it's like reliving that night over and over and over again. Does a leader need to make sure they take care of themselves? I mean, we can't care for others if we're not caring for ourselves, can we?
You're absolutely correct. And I think that's probably one thing that any leader struggles with, even if it's someone you consider a leader of your own family. I think it's really common for mothers to make sure their children get to the doctors and their spouses get to the doctors and their pets are taken care of and their parents are taken care of. But oops, I haven't been to the doctor in a year and a half. Things like that it's very easy. And certainly what Barb is dealing with is it's a trauma event. Let's be honest. Anybody in that situation, you're experiencing a trauma over and over and over. So you have to take care of yourself physically and mentally. And there's a lot of ways that we can do that. But the first step is recognizing that you've experienced a trauma it doesn't have to be as significant as an active violence event. Anything can be a trauma. Your spouse leaving you can be a trauma. Horrible car accident is a trauma. So leaders have to recognize within themselves what they need to adapt to and take care of physically, mentally, emotionally, and make sure that the people that they're leading, you hate to get involved sometimes in your employees' personal lives, but you have to recognize that every single day, everyone is dealing with something impactful, and help your employees to the extent you can without stepping into their shit show, for lack of a better term, but lead them and help them grow and develop and address the things in their personal life and professional life and help them continue to improve.
One of the things that she talked about that I think shows that she is truly a leader, not a manager. She obviously was torn up about her people. But the other thing is, she was talking about the people that she served, because she said the thing that really bothered her was she didn't want people to hear those poor kids calling for help. Even now, she's still trying to protect those kids, and she doesn't even know who they are. But that's part of her job as a leader, because that's ultimately who we serve. She serves those people through her people. I don't think leadership is possible. True leadership isn't possible without love. And she just exuded love throughout her entire presentation. You know her much better than I do. Would you agree that that's how she operates?
Absolutely. And I think as a general layperson, obviously I train in public safety, but I don't work hands-on in public safety. And we forget that, you use the term public servant. They're serving their communities 24/7, 365. And that becomes a burden, not in a traumatic way necessarily, but when you're always making sure that everything you say and do is being interpreted properly, it can be very draining. And I think the situation that Chris and Barb addressed yesterday was very impactful when you realize that here we are a year and a half later, and they're still dealing with these things on virtually a daily basis. That's tough. That's really tough.
I have such an appreciation for Chris and Barb, because they've given this presentation numerous times before, and they don't do it for glory, and they don't do it because they want to talk about it because it's traumatic for them to talk about it, but they do it so that other professionals in our field have an understanding of what it takes when something like that occurs. And they want to either prevent the damage from being done or mitigate the impact of the damage. Man, I think that's so powerful for leaders to share. Hey, when they did the thing, it was amazing. They talked about what we did well and what we could have done better. And it takes a lot to be vulnerable for a leader to get up and say, hey, listen, this is something I did, but I could have done much better. And so I want to tell you so that you can do better.
Agreed. And I think that's a lot of what our training and command presence training is all about, is helping each other so that the next time something happens, someone is more prepared than we were. And that's not to say that we were unprepared. That's just learning and growing from every opportunity that comes along. No two situations will ever be the same. But if we can take elements from each one and respond better next time, either in the field, behind the console, or as just general human beings, we learn and we grow. We learn and we grow.
By the way, Chris and Barb, if you're listening to this podcast, thank you so much for sharing. I took so much away from that, and thank you for what you did and for exemplifying what true leadership is about, both on that day and every day since then. Thank you so much for that. Today, as we're recording, yet another rock star up. Your business partner calls him Junior. I think it was so funny because they're doing the intro. Andy actually was a senior officer that worked and knew our presenter today, but he says, hey, you know what? I started going back for working on my college, and I walked into a classroom, and guess who my instructor was? It truly is an example of a leader should be constantly learning. What's the saying? Sometimes the teacher, always the student. And it was such a great way of Taking it from the abstract world and put it in the concrete, you said that you're constantly trying to learn, but I think that's something that's a part of your organization, isn't it? That the constant learning and improving and seeing how we can do it better.
Absolutely. You want to make sure that, particularly as a training provider, that what we are doing is well translated into the real world environment. So it's a constant looking at evaluation forms from our previous classes, talking to people who are out there working the field and working behind the console, working in the jails, whatever the case may be, getting feedback on, hey, these are the hot button topics, or this is what I'd like some more on. You just have to constantly be in a state of learning and growing and trying to figure out how to best meet those needs. And I do want to thank Chief Rosman and Barb Davidson for yesterday. They were extremely helpful for all of us. And then, of course, again, taking what we can learn from that and improving upon reaction in the future. Education in whatever classroom it might be, from K through 12 to college to adult learning, is super important. And I can't stress that to people enough. I learn and grow from my children still. And all three of our daughters are adult daughters. They're not little kids, but just yesterday learned how to generate an AI photo through my girls. That's great. That makes me look a lot better, a lot younger than what I really am. Look at different opportunities on ways that you can learn and who you can learn from. It's not just sitting in a classroom. Shoot, I learned things from my 90-year-old grandmother before she passed away. I learned things from my parents. My father actually passed away 13 years ago today, but my mom continues to be a dynamic superstar, and I learn from her all the time. So it's not just reading a book, and it's not just learning from your college professors. Learn from people in other fields. I have an incredible group of female friends that we get together, and they're probably 10 of the most impactful people in my life. Broad variety of careers and interests and so forth, but learn and grow from anywhere you can.
Being intentional and accepting the opportunities that we're presented with. But we do have to talk about another opportunity, because our podcast is predicated on the belief that leadership shows up in a whole bunch of different faces, right? But so does courage. If you remember back to the intro, we talked about this career that you had before MACNLOW. And I mean this with the utmost respect. Why in the world would you leave something stable and become a business owner? Because that type of stress, I don't think I have that kind of courage. So I'll ask the question, what made you make the decision to say, you know what, I think that's a good idea. Let's go take on some more stress. So I'll ask you, what made you decide that? And then what was it that drew you to MACNLOW as that avenue to go and become the business owner? I
made the decision to move. At the time, I was working at Sparrow Hospital in communications. It was shift work. It was 24/7. I was a floater. So, one day I might work 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. The next day I might work 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. That in and of itself was stressful. Loved that job, but the shift work was problematic because I was not a stable shift. It was floating. Andy came to me. My brother came to me. He had actually been teaching for MACNLOW for a number of years. And Merlene McKinnon, the owner at the time, wonderful Spitfire, intelligent, brilliant lady, decided to retire, as she should, in her 70s. And she offered her instructors the opportunity to purchase. And Andy said, gosh, I would love to keep teaching. I'd love to teach, but I can't quit the day job. At the time, he had his triplet sons were infancy. It was like, geez, I want to do this, but can we make this happen? And I said, you know what? My degree is in business. I've always wanted to own my own business. I had the financial capability to do that because of my husband's work. So that part made it easy. I had the desire, I had the financial ability, and I was deathly tired from shift work. So figured if Andy can help me with getting to understand the public safety aspects, I can handle the business side. And here we are, I think 11 and a half years later. And I can't say I've loved every minute because self-employment has its ups and downs. But honestly, it was the perfect move at the perfect time. And for me, an example of when one door closes, another one opens. And I have the opportunity and a great time working with my baby brother. And I also get to work from my home and spend more time with family. And it's just been fantastic all the way around.
It seems like that you're making impact on people who are making impact on a bunch of different people. And that has to be part of the equation as well. I mean, you're impacting people that you'll never speak to. You'll probably never meet. They'll probably know nothing about you, but it's okay because you're having positive impact on them.
I'd like to think so. Obviously, I was raised in a family where obviously my brother is a police officer. My uncle is a police officer, have cousins in military service or former military service. And I like to think that we're all connected in some way, shape, or form. So if we can train a 911 operator to handle a call more effectively, and that saves somebody else's family member, and the road patrol response is prompt and efficient, and EMS gets there and does a great job, just think of the ripple effect that transpires. And I literally had nothing to do with it per se, other than to have the right instructor in the right classroom at the right time. And it goes back to that ripple effect.
And I think that, again, leaders don't try to make an impact for recognition, but that they make an impact for doing good. But I do have to ask you, because I happen to know your brother pretty well. There are a lot of family businesses, family-owned businesses that fail, not because the product's not good or not because they're not a viable option, but because of infighting. As a leader, because your brother's still working his full-time job, are there any unique dynamics, or is there anything that you have to watch out for? Because if you start fighting in the business, it's not going to stop in the business. It's going to have impact at Thanksgiving and Christmas, isn't it?
Well, nothing's going to get in the way of the Thanksgiving dinner, trust me. But no, honestly, I have to say, Andy and I were raised, and again, I'll take this back to my parents. We were raised with a concept of fair and reasonable and great communication. And we very rarely have any differences. And when we do, we have never had, a screaming match or anything like that. We respond rather than react, and have literally been able to walk through any small differences that we have encountered. And for the most part, I have to say they're almost negligible in terms of the whole scheme of what we've done in the last 11 years. They've been tiny little blips on the radar. And I credit Andy for keeping his cool a lot of times, because I tend to be a little more hot-headed than he is. Well, probably a lot more hot-headed than he is. But we've been able to work through everything. So again, goes back to communication skills.
The willingness to listen, I think, is such a powerful tool for a leader. So I think that's part of it. But I also think that you two are united in what the mission is for MACNLOW. And when you're working for the same purpose, it makes the differences a lot less meaningful, doesn't it?
Of course. Again, we want to make sure that what we're putting out there for our training products are top of the line. And when people leave a MACNLOW classroom, that they are leaving with relevant, practical information that they can take back and use on the job that afternoon if they need to, or the very next day, and for years and years to come. So yeah, the mission for our organization and for any organization is super helpful in guiding what you're doing and how you're doing it and what you're doing it for.
Again, an indication that you're doing it well, going back to yesterday. And I'm sure that, in fact, I know that it's the same, not just in law enforcement, but in the private sector. When people come to training, one of the things they look forward to the most is getting out of there. But yesterday, man, we saw something happen that was just mind-blowing, because we got to the scheduled end of the class, the scheduled time, the time that's on the schedule that people get to go and do whatever they want. Kristen Bouck, they weren't done yet. They asked, hey, listen, this is for you. Do you want us to keep going, or do you want us to go ahead and end it? And over and over and over again, people said, no, keep going. And folks, this class went well into the evening, and nobody left. And the reason why nobody left was because it was relevant and it was practical, and the quality of training that was being provided was unparalleled. I don't know about you, but my experience is, man, about 2:00 in the afternoon, people are going, are they almost done yet? Not the case yesterday.
Nope, it's not uncommon to look around the classroom and see people glancing at their phones or glancing at their Apple Watch or looking up at the wall, looking for a clock. Yesterday, 5:00 rolled around. Chris and Barb were still going, and I didn't want to move. And I've heard the presentation before, and I lived the event that night. Man, it was good stuff. And as Andy mentioned, we've all been held over in public safety. You could have held us over even longer. We all could have probably gone even through dinner if we, starving or not. It was good stuff. And when you get in that kind of situation as a learner, you eat it up. I could have stayed for hours.
I couldn't agree more. And it's one of those things, and I think this is certainly one of those things that transcends industries, is that shared burdens are easier burdens to carry. I hope what Chris and Barb took away from us yesterday was that we're here for them and that we want to help share that burden, whatever that looks like. If sharing the burden means sitting and listening to them so that they can talk through the process again, everybody was all in.
They sure were. And I hope that we do help them in sharing their burden and moving on to be mentally, physically, and emotionally sound, not just for this instance, but for everything that arises for everyone in public safety. It's a total team effort, and I was thrilled to be a part of it yesterday. Such a great experience.
All right, so let's talk about another experience. We mentioned in the intro that you are the mother to 3 daughters. God bless you. I have 4 kids, but only 1 daughter. Laura, if you're listening, yes, you were the biggest stressor. Okay, so you had 3 of them. I think one of the things that I am constantly reminded of is how closely related effective leadership is to being a good parent. You were sharing a story with me about one of your daughters. As I listened to this story, I could only think about that's what resiliency looks like. Your daughter went to college, as I understand, and decided to move completely out of state. And then yet once she got there, it required a complete change in what she believed her life pathway was going to look like. So as a parent, describe to me how well she handled that and what you learned about your daughter and from your daughter from that process.
Sure. My middle daughter, my firstborn, but our middle daughter overall, Taylor, decided when she was a senior in college at Michigan State, she majored in human development and family studies, basically social work, and decided that she'd had an absolute enough of the Michigan winters and was going to move to Southern California. And after a lot of flying back and forth and interviewing, a job didn't come through, and she decided, you know what? I'm moving anyways. So we packed her up and she and I drove across the country and got to LA. And after being there, I think 12 days into a 14-day stay, she didn't have a job. She didn't have a place to live. I was practically levitating off the bed at night, having panic attacks. And you know what? She was tough stuff. And she said, I got this. And she ended up through a friend who came through for me from high school. Shout out Phoebe. She got a job in television production with Dancing with the Stars, and over the last 7 years has moved her way up the ranks in production. And I tell you what, talk about being ballsy and having grit, moving across the country with not another friend, living by yourself, meeting everybody's new. Everybody's new. Everything is new. But I think what I learned from her from that is, you know what? Go for it. There's a safety net in place with your family that will love you and support you no matter what. And I hope that even though Taylor's story is really unique and interesting, I'm fairly certain that my other 2 girls will say that they feel that family love and support. But you know what? For anybody else out there, dang, be like Taylor and go for it.
Well, I think one of the things that they talk about people on their deathbed, when they talk about regrets, very rarely does it have anything to do with what they did. The regrets are on the things that they wish they'd done, the things they wish they would have tried. And it doesn't sound like she's going to have any regrets. And so I think the same is true for leaders. I think some of the biggest leadership regrets aren't from what we did, but from what we failed to do as leaders for our people.
I agree. It's so easy to look back and say, oh, I wish I would have done this, or I wish I would have done that. You know what? Take the chance, give it a try, whether it be a new policy or a new way of looking at something on the job. Look at it through a different perspective, try something different. And I hope what I've instilled in Lindsay, Taylor, and Cameron is there's always an opportunity to try again. So whether it's in your job or whether it's with your family, look at something from a different perspective and give it a try. I mean, what's the worst thing that happens is it doesn't work and you try something else.
I keep going back to the presentation because it was so good. That's what took place in that dispatch center that night. But because they had never had to cope with something at this level, at this volume. They were talking about the number of calls that were coming in. And folks, just to kind of give you a quick idea, and I don't understand it all myself, but when call levels, especially 911 calls, reach a certain level in a dispatch center like that, there's supposed to be this electronic gate that drops down, and then it starts diverting some of those calls to alternate sites because you've exceeded the capacity of the people in that center. Well, what was supposed to drop down didn't drop down, but the call still had to be answered. And they started talking about, this thing is such of a broad nature. They started talking about things like cloning calls and stuff like that so that the information would be available to there. Something that, quite honestly, I don't think was part of their regular protocol, but it required them to try it, and they did it because Barb was leading them. I was blown away by what she exemplified. She was willing to try something because it needed to be done. And it sounds, on a different way, in a different scale, that's what your daughter did as well.
Yeah, why not? Give it a try. And like Barb said that night, they didn't even have a chance to think about it. It was just like, we've got to do this and we've got to do it now. And obviously you live with the consequences of that. And in that case, it worked out beautifully. But if it doesn't, then I know they would have regrouped and tried something else. And bottom line is the end result worked out well. But if it hadn't, they'd have found a way to make it happen. It's adjusting and accommodating and growing. And can't we do that on a daily basis?
We've reached the part of the show where I give my key takeaways. And one of the key takeaways that I want to share with you is what you just talked about. It had to be incredibly hard for you as a leader to fly back to Michigan with the uncertainty that was out there. But you were able to do it in large part because you knew that you had prepared her properly for that thing. Now, maybe not that specifically, but you had built this resilient, resourceful young woman who was capable. And that's a reflection on you as a leader.
Thank you. I'd like to think so, but I don't often think in those terms. I like to give credit where credit is due. And in this case, Taylor did great things. My other girls have done great things. The people that currently work for MACNLOW do great things. And I think that is how I would like to be seen as a leader, is recognizing the talents of other people and using those to the best advantage for our community as a whole, our business as a whole, for their individual selves. And yeah, I guess that is being a leader. It's looking out for other people, taking care of them and taking care of you. And it's, kind of sounds like, kumbaya, but one big happy family. And the better we all are, the better we all are.
Absolutely. On an organizational level and on a professional level. And so that takes me to the next takeaway. Leaders are most impactful when they're impactful through their people, not over their people, if that makes sense.
That makes total sense. My instructors don't need me to tell them how to teach. In fact, I would never want to teach. I started out in secondary education in college, and after a short couple of hours in a high school classroom, at one point I went, this isn't for Chris. So yeah, recognizing the talents of others and developing those and putting the right people in the right place is definitely my leadership forte. It's not teaching.
And that leads to the next takeaway. One of the most important things that a leader can bring to the table is not just getting the right people in the door, it's getting them at the right desk in the building and giving them the right assignments. I don't like that word, but it's the only word I can come up with right now. That allows them to be more effective, which selfishly also helps you.
I talk to my instructors from time to time on, a lot of them are full-time employees at an agency, and they teach for MACNLOW on a part-time basis on their days off or over taking vacation time and so forth. But it's a win-win-win situation. Obviously, I'm the business owner. My brother's a business owner. We win financially. Our instructors win financially because they're picking up extra income. But the third part of that win comes from what we mentioned earlier, the people who are in the classroom learning from really great instructors. And I can't emphasize enough that it's all a part of one big team. I don't even like to mention the financial part, because a big part of public safety training is what we've touched on, being like Chris and Barb and making the world a better place so that in any incident, there's a better response next time. It's constantly win, win, win. And it's not just a back and forth between Chris and the instructors. It's all of the people that we train and all of the people that we help grow throughout the state and around the country.
Well, and that leads me to my next takeaway. The win-win-win comes more quickly and happens more often and is much larger when there's love involved. And that's love of the people that we are blessed to serve, those that we are blessed to work with, and quite honestly, love of the profession. This is a very difficult profession. If the leader doesn't love it, there's a good chance their people aren't going to love it. And if you don't love it, you're probably not going to have the successes that you could have.
I would definitely tell people, especially those in public safety, and we discuss this in our classroom frequently, you have to love what you do, especially in public safety. It takes its toll on you. Shift work takes its toll on you. The things that you see and hear and respond to take their toll. If you're not in the right profession, now is the time to get out. And that doesn't matter if it's public safety or if it's education or if it's nursing or whatever. If you don't love it, if you don't have a passion for it, it's probably time to find something else. And opportunities abound. Try to dig into what really lights your fire. And if it's not public safety, something else will.
And there's no shame in that.
Absolutely.
There's no shame in that. And then the last takeaway, because you talked about the ripple effect several times. We often do not understand the long-term and far-reaching effects that leadership can have. It's one of those things that if you do it well, you're going to have, I believe, as they say in the scientific world, second and third order effects, that you're going to have those things, the unintended audience even, and that's when you know you're really, really making a difference.
Agree. And I think the world would be a better place if we all understood that we're all leaders in some way, shape, or form. And you got to take care of yourself. You got to take care of your people. Be kind to each other. Be good to each other. We all have more alike than we have different. And I think a great leader understands that.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you so much for being with us today. It's been a pleasure. And I want to thank you for spearheading this thing that we're at right now. This Operation Northern Exposure as it's called. I know it's made an impact on me, and I've talked to the people that are here, and I know it's making an impact on them. So thank you so much for doing that.
Thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to be your podcast guest today, and for all of the information and personality that you and John and others at Command Presence have brought to this event. Truly, it's a pleasure working with you both. And I'm just excited for this partnership. Although informal as it is, I think we work well together, and I think we'll continue to have great, fun learning events. And it's been an opportunity of a lifetime for me to sit here with you today. Thank you, Michael.
And that's what love's all about, because I love working with you guys. I've grown to love you, and I love your brother. That guy right there, he's fantastic. And I've known him for a while, and he's made a big impact on me. But to our listeners, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. Folks, if you enjoyed this episode, and we sure as heck hope you did, because we put a lot of work into it, be sure to follow the podcast on your favorite podcast provider. You can also find this episode on YouTube. You can subscribe over there. We're going to be putting out some bonus content on there over the next few weeks. Be sure to check that out. Also, check us out on LinkedIn. We try to put extra stuff out there as well. It's a great professional platform for us to make connections, as we like to say, for leaders to network, to find somebody else that's been through what you're going through that may be able to help you. As you go throughout the week, folks, I want to remind you again, the way we end every episode: be the leader you wish you had.